In the quiet stretch of land near Ulama Ridge, where the wind hums through tall grass and birdsong fills the trees, lives a girl named Sifa. She is not dressed in fine clothes, nor does she carry the wealth that others boast of. But her presence is known in every corner of the village. When a child cries, she is there with a carved wooden toy. When an elder coughs, she arrives with leaves crushed between her palms, whispering healing into boiling pots. Sifa was orphaned young. Her parents, both gatherers, died in a flood that swept through the valley many years ago. With no one else to claim her, she was taken in by her aunt, Mama Jalia, a woman hardened by her own misfortunes and poisoned by envy. Mama Jalia never missed a chance to remind Sifa that she was nothing more than an extra mouth to feed. "If only I'd been blessed with a real daughter," she often muttered loud enough for Sifa to hear. Still, Sifa answered her cruelty with calm and continued to work. Every morning, before the sun rose high, Sifa tied a faded wrap around her waist, slung her straw basket across her shoulder, and walked deep into the forest. She knew where the hidden herbs grew, the mint leaves tucked behind rock crevices, the bark that cured fever, the roots that strengthened tired bones. She spoke to the trees and sang to the breeze, not to chase away loneliness, but to remind herself that life, even in silence, was sacred. The villagers watched her with quiet admiration. Some whispered prayers for her fortune to change. Others shook their heads in pity. But none could deny that Sifa, though poor in coin, was rich in soul. And that richness, though unseen, would soon ripple far beyond the ridge. The morning mist clung low to the earth as Sifa made her way deeper into the forest than usual. The ground was damp beneath her feet, and the sky, still grey from sleep, seemed to blur the trees together like a painted dream. She was searching for a rare healing root, one known to grow only near a hidden creek wrapped in stones and shaded by ancient fig trees. Her basket hung loosely from her shoulder, already filled with herbs, when she heard it, a sudden rustle in the thick underbrush. She stopped. Her breath caught. Every instinct told her to turn and run. Wild dogs sometimes wandered this far inland, or worse, leopards. Then came the groan, not an animal, human. Sifa's heart beat faster. She slowly moved toward the sound, pushing back a curtain of vines. There, beneath a crooked tree and tangled thorns, lay a man. Blood stained his shirt, one arm twisted oddly beneath him. His clothes were too fine for a villager, made of city cloth. His boots were caked in red earth, scuffed like he'd been running. A broken wristwatch clung to his wrist, the face cracked and frozen in time. She looked around. No signs of a cart, no horse, no trail. The man opened his eyes for a moment, dazed. His lips moved, but no words came. Then they closed again. Sifa didn't know who he was. She didn't ask if he was dangerous. Her hands simply moved. She rolled him gently, knelt low, and lifted him onto her back. He was heavy. Each step back toward the village was slow, dragging through mud, her arms trembling with strain. But she never stopped. Because something inside her said, "He needs to live. And I am the only one here." When Sifa returned to the village with the bloodied man slumped over her back, the reactions were immediate and harsh. Children peeked from behind doors. Elders frowned and whispered prayers under their breath, and Mama Jalia, arms folded tightly across her chest, was the loudest of all. "You brought a cursed man into this house," she shouted. "No name, no witness, no story. He's a spirit or worse. Let him rot in the bush like a wild dog." But Sifa didn't respond. She laid the man gently on a grass mat inside her tiny hut and closed the door on her aunt's screaming. For days, she worked in silence. She ground leaves between stones, mixed potions in calabashes, and boiled herbs until their scents filled the air like smoke from a sacred fire. She cleaned his wounds with care, even as they bled again and again. She spooned thin broth between his lips, wiped sweat from his brow, and whispered to him as though he could hear her. The man hovered on the edge of life, but Sifa never left. She slept beside him on the floor, one hand always within reach of his. On the 7th night, he stirred. His eyes opened, blinking slowly against the low firelight. Panic crossed his face. "It's all right," Sifa said softly. "You're safe." His voice cracked when he finally spoke. Where am I?" She gave him water, waited. He said his name was Mr. Bako. He remembered a road, a sudden ambush, the sound of yelling, and shattered glass. Then the jungle swallowed him. Everything else was gone. Sifa nodded, not pressing for more. What mattered was that he was breathing. Alive. She didn't know yet that saving this stranger would change everything, not just for her, but for the village, the kingdom, and the legacy of kindness itself. Mr. Bako healed slowly, his body weary from the wounds, but his mind sharp, sharper now than before. Each day he spent in Sifa's hut brought with it quiet revelations. She never once treated him like a burden, never asked who he truly was, and never looked at him with the calculating eyes of someone hoping for repayment. Her care was simple, sincere, offered the way sunlight is, freely. He began to observe her as if trying to understand the puzzle of a soul so selfless. When he could finally sit upright, he saw her working with calloused hands, pressing herbs into cloth, caring for a blind elder, and fetching water from a distant well without complaint. Then, one afternoon, he witnessed something that stayed with him. Sifa had cooked a small pot of porridge, their last ration before she would need to trade again. Just as she was about to eat, an old beggar appeared outside, trembling with hunger. Without a second thought, she handed over her bowl with a warm smile and sat quietly beside the fire, content with her own hunger. Bako, moved beyond words, reached into the tattered pocket of his ruined coat and pulled out a few crumpled bills. "Please," he said, his voice still hoarse, "take this. For everything you've done." She shook her head, gently closing his hand. "You were hurt," she replied. "I just did what was right." What she didn't know, what no one in the village knew, was that Mr. Bako was no ordinary man. He was one of the wealthiest landowners in the entire region, a billionaire who had built his empire quietly, through farmland, trade routes, and discreet influence. He had come to Ulama Ridge in disguise, intending to inspect new land he'd acquired, but his own bodyguards, men he'd trusted, had turned on him for reasons he was still trying to understand. Now, lying on the mat of a poor girl's hut, he realized Sifa had done what money could never buy. She had offered him dignity, and in doing so, changed the course of his life forever. The sun had barely dipped below the ridge when two strangers arrived in Ulama village. Their clothes were too fine for the dusty roads, their shoes too clean for forest paths. They spoke with smooth city voices, carrying the scent of cologne and something colder, urgency. "We're searching for someone," one of them told the villagers. "Our employer has gone missing, a man of importance. We believe he may be here." Mama Jalea, always hungry for attention, leaned forward eagerly. "You're speaking of the stranger my niece dragged home from the bush, aren't you?" Sifa's heart froze as the men turned their sharp eyes toward her hut. She stepped in front of them before they could approach. "He's gone," she lied. "Left days ago." But they lingered, asking questions that felt more like traps. Mr. Bako, peering from the shadows, gave no signal of recognition. When the men finally left, unsatisfied and watching everything, they promised to return. That night, Sifa confronted him. "They called you their employer," she said. Bako nodded slowly. They were once mine, but I believe they're part of what happened. Someone close wants me erased. His voice was grim. If they find me before I know who betrayed me, I may not live to find out. Sifa placed her hand on his. Then they won't find you. He looked at her in silence, knowing he was now trusting his life, not to guards or gold, but to the poorest girl in the village. And yet, for the first time, he felt safe. The stars were quiet that night, scattered across the sky like secrets waiting to be spoken. Bako stood at the edge of the forest, a bag slung over his shoulder. Strength finally returned to his body. A vehicle waited somewhere beyond the trees, discreet and reliable, sent by one of the few men he still trusted. Sifa walked beside him, silent for most of the way. Each step felt heavier than the last. She had watched him heal, listened to his breath steady over weeks, seen glimpses of a world far beyond the ridge in the way he spoke, moved, thought, and now he was leaving. When they reached the place where the trees thickened and the road disappeared into shadows, she stopped. Her voice was soft. Be safe. Bako turned to look at her. And remember, she added, her eyes glistening in the moonlight. Some hearts are poorer without kindness, not coins. He opened his mouth as if to say something. Perhaps a promise, perhaps a confession. But no words came. Just a slow nod and a long look that lingered like unfinished poetry. Then he disappeared into the forest. Back in her hut, Sifa lay on her mat, listening to the wind, and for the first time in years, the silence wasn't peaceful, it stung. The village of Ulama had never known such noise. One clear morning, the ground itself seemed to hum with a strange vibration. Children ran to the hills, shouting about the sky, while elders shaded their eyes and stared upward in disbelief. A helicopter hovered above the village square, sending clouds of red dust spinning. Moments later, black SUVs rumbled through the narrow dirt roads. Men in sharp suits stepped out, speaking into devices no villager recognized. The market scattered in confusion. Chickens ran wild. Baskets of mangoes dropped forgotten to the ground. And then, he appeared. Mr. Bako stepped from the central vehicle dressed in a pristine white suit, his face calm but radiant with power. Mama Jalia gasped so loudly she had to be seated on a crate of yams. Women covered their heads. Men muttered blessings under their breath. He walked through the crowd without hesitation, past the gawking faces and silent awe, all the way to Sifa's hut, where she sat quietly grinding herbs with a stone, her face as calm as always. He dropped to one knee in front of her. You gave me life when you had nothing, he said, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. Now I've returned to give you back everything. The cameras flashed. The press followed, catching every moment as Mr. Bako stood and turned to the crowd. He introduced her as his sister in spirit, honoring the girl who saved him not with medicine, but with mercy. Then he announced his gift, a state-of-the-art health center, a school for orphaned girls, and an herbal institute to preserve and teach the healing knowledge Sifa had mastered, all to be built in her name. Ulema would never be the same again, but neither would Sifa. With the eyes of the nation upon her and limitless gifts within reach, Sifa was offered everything: gleaming cars, a mansion in the capital, even a personal staff to serve her day and night. But her answer was simple, unwavering. I will stay here. This is my soil. These are my people. And so, on the same patch of earth, where her small, crumbling hut once stood, a new home was built, modest, strong, and filled with light. Beside it rose the Sifa Herbal Institute, a place where young girls from across the region came to learn the ancient art of healing through roots, leaves, and wisdom passed down in whispers. Sifa became its first director, Not just a teacher, but a guide. She taught with patience, with gentleness, and with fire when needed. She made sure every girl had shoes, food, and hope. She made sure no child ever went hungry or unheard the way she once had. Mama Jalia, who had once mocked and mistreated her, now watched from afar, silent, regretful. One day, Sifa called her gently and offered her a role at the health center, tending to the gardens. No harsh words, no revenge, just forgiveness, and the quiet dignity of a healed heart.